me? I'm hard to stop. One time I got a call from the editor of Fine Gardening magazine. And she called and said, Mr. Johnson, we would love for you to do 3 plant profiles of your favorite plants for the magazine. And I said, oh, well, that'll be easy. I'll do azaleas, camellias, and native azaleas. And she says, oh, yes, it's real easy in 50 words or less. I said, excuse me, ma'am. I see a problem right now. I'm from South Georgia. I can't give you my address in 50 words or less. Okay, we're going to talk tonight about creating the romantic garden. It's Valentine's Day, but I will tell you, it may not be what you expect, so just buckle in. I am, without a doubt, the Forrest Gump of the horticulture world. I don't know what I did to deserve it. I stumble into more than most folks could find if they went out looking. My first job out of school, I built a presidential library. I'm in my 20s. President Carter enlisted me to do the gardens and then later on do the buildings. I laugh and I tell everybody he got me at the right time in my life because in your 20s you know it all. I couldn't run the job now, I would be too stupid. But I spent 15 years there. I got to apprentice under Kosaku Nakani, the world-renowned Japanese architect. I met my lovely wife there. She was President Carter's florist. My wife, Mary Ann, she won't brag on herself. She was an award-winning designer in Atlanta till I married her and saved her from all that. After I finished up there, my next job was National Horticulturist for the American Camellia Society in Massey Lane Gardens. This was my favorite job. We lived in the camellia gardens there, and my entire job was to fly around the country helping people grow them. It was just wonderful. This is the new expansion. I did most of that. And when we start talking about romantic gardens, if you go and see the old part of the garden, it's extremely formal. What they call the West Garden was mine, and it's not. You can see the difference there of the different garden styles there. I was at Magnolia. I would travel the south talking about camellias, but I would also talk about the romantic gardening scheme. That's my preferred type of design. Magnolia, Drayton Hasty Jr., the man on the left, when his father passed away, he took over managing Magnolia Gardens. Magnolia is America's last large-scale romantic garden. And he was smart enough, when you live in your house for several years, you don't see the stuff that needs painting, this and that. He was smart enough when he took over from his father to say, we need to get some fresh blood in here, somebody different to look at this. And over a 2-year period, he spent trying to lure us to Charleston. I had no intention of going to South Carolina. I'm a Georgia boy. I figured South Carolina was a foreign country, and I did find out in some ways it is. But I was not too stupid to turn him down on a free trip to Charleston twice a year to talk about it. We would go to Charleston, we'd talk about it, I'd turn him down and come back. January, before we took the job, he invited us back. I told my wife, Mary Ann, I'm not going to take the job, but we'll get to go to Charleston, see the camellias in bloom. But this time, Drayton was smart enough, he gave up on me and he went to work on Mary Ann. He put us up at his bed and breakfast down on the Battery, $400 a night, and that is so wasted on a man. Mary Ann fell in love with it. I'm thinking I had more room at the Motel 6 last week. We go out to eat, he buys me a bourbon and he sticks me on the other side of the table. And I heard him whispering to Mary Ann, you and Tom ever been to Argentina? We're going to send y'all to Argentina every summer just to relax. A little bit later, he said, I know y'all have a home in Atlanta, but the cabin we have for y'all when you're at the plantation is 10 foot from the Ashley River. You can sit in the hot tub and watch the ships go up and down. A little bit later, he said, don't y'all have a child at home? And Mary Ann said, yes, Logan, our last child at the time was 10. Drayton leaned back and grinned and said, how would he like the job of training the miniature ponies here at Magnolia? Silly me, I turned the job down. We're on our way back to Georgia. We stopped to eat. Mary Ann looks at me across the table and says, let me make this perfectly clear. We're going to Charleston. I fell in love with Magnolia the first time I saw it. But understanding what we're going to talk about tonight, a romantic garden, I knew that the restoration of the gardens would consume the rest of my life. And in my 40s, I didn't know that that's what I wanted to do. I'm glad we decided that now. So, We're going to create us a romantic garden tonight. You're going to see a lot of pictures of magnolia because I spent so much time there, and then we'll end up at what we're doing at our home on the backwater. Now, I want everybody to take a deep breath and forget everything you ever learned about garden design because it's all wrong, and we're going to start off with a clean slate. You ready? You only do two things in garden design. If you boil everything away to a pure product, there are only 2 points. A formal garden, such as our competition Middleton up the road, a formal garden controls nature. And a romantic garden cooperates with nature. That's the basic difference. And if you look, every other garden in the world will be somewhere on the scale between those 2 points. What was the Romantic movement? At the end of the 18th century and well into the 19th century, Romanticism quickly spread throughout Europe and the United States, challenging the rational idea held so tightly during the Enlightenment or the Age of Reason. What I like to say is the Romantic movement is the time the Age of Reason got its butt kicked. That's just all there is to it. Artists and designers emphasized that a sense and emotion, not simply reason and order, were equally important means of understanding and experiencing the world. Romanticism celebrated the individual imagination. Let's read that again. Romanticism celebrated the individual imagination. In other words, how I feel about the world is more important than the structure, the math, everything else about it. It's how it affects me personally. And that's what you need to think about when you're doing a romantic garden. The romantic garden was man's attempt at recreating Eden, a place where man, God, and nature can be in harmony together. Man does not control nature. He simply designs himself as a part of the song that's already playing. Simply put. To build a romantic garden is an attempt to blend into the natural landscape, growing a little on the wild side, while blending in romantic elements, such as introduced in the 18th century were ponds, small lakes, bridges, imitation ruins, sculptures. Each of the romantic elements in the garden is incorporated into the foliage to enhance the wild look of the garden. Paths of gravel and dirt meander around, and the garden is supposed to look somewhat unkept, somewhat overgrown, somewhat unclean. Now, whenever I say that, some husband turns to his wife and says, "That's what we got at home, is a romantic garden." But the truth is, it's the illusion of being unmaintained. This is Magnolia. At Magnolia, we had 15 full-time horticulturalists and 120 Clemson Master Gardener volunteers working every week to make the gardens look unmaintained. There's another picture of this to explain that. See how beautiful that looks? It looks wild. That's a Cherokee rose there. Anybody that has grown a Cherokee rose, it never grows like that. Actually, it takes more labor to maintain a romantic garden. A lot of the early gardens in America started out romantic, and then they were formalized because of the expense of handling. A formal garden, you just take the shears, zip, 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 and you're gone. In a romantic garden, everything has to be done by hand, so it doesn't look like man is putting his hands on the garden. This was our Audubon swamp there. Now, first look, and there's going to be a lot of this. I'm trying to challenge your thinking. First look, those are floating mats of weeds and everything. Why would you not go in there and just spray all of that out and have beautiful trees and beautiful water and everything like that? We have to understand what you're looking at. That's stick tight. That's floating mats of stick tight, and this is what they look like when they bloom. So you need to pay attention to the environment there. The natural look of what you've got there. To spray all of that out, if you hadn't seen them bloom, look what you would have lost. I love this picture because when you're designing a garden, most times if you got a steeple on a church down this pathway here, or something nice to see, we always landscape towards that to draw people's eyes down that way. You don't do that in a romantic garden. See how beautiful that looks way off? But what you would miss to see there is, look at this beautiful rose pink lichen on the tree over there. You would miss that. 90% of the people that go miss that because our eyes are trained to look for the depth there, that there's something that they're trying to highlight in the painting. Once again, you're working to enhance the natural beauty of a place. What you have to do before you start creating a romantic garden is you want to look at what you got in your yard that's beautifully there now. You don't want to slipe it all off and come back and start with something else. You want to start tucking stuff in to enhance the overall look. I always put this in because I want you to think about something. Look at the ancient trees, the old barn there. This adds stature. This talks about time. If I was to change and put a big new, brand new metal building right there, or paint that bright red, it would change the entire look of that. That's what you want to look at, is what you're trying to present. This presents, even if you took the trees out, if you had little bitty trees there in an old barn, it wouldn't fit. This shows exactly, it just shows time. And that's what you want to do. Change anything about that, something's lost. Same way with this bridge. That limb over there probably hits some tall fellas in the head every time they go across it. Saw that out, saw the next limb out, and rather than a tunnel, you just got a bridge somewhere. This actually lures you under a tunnel. Like Alice in Wonderland, you're stepping through something. I love this picture. 90% of you that go to Magnolia will never see this. This is a hidden garden. Inside a romantic garden, you always have hidden rooms or gardens where the majority of the people walk down the main path. A few rambunctious souls would see a goat trail over here, and they would step through the overgrowth into these magnificent hidden gardens. And they were actually designed with a purpose. They were designed so romantics could get off the path and do what romantics do. There are several of these at Magnolia, and what you have to look for if you go is look where the brick had been worn down on the side of the path, leading you through that. And it's just a special area to step inside these gardens, hid inside the gardens. Now maybe you can't do this at your own home, but you can always work in a bench somewhere that you can be alone to contemplate the universe, to read. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can be tucked back behind some tall shrubs or even in the corner here. But these are hidden gardens that's yours, for you. Most people don't get to see them. Once again, the goal of the romantic garden is to work to enhance and not replace the beauty of the location. Everywhere, if you look, there's something beautiful about everything, and you don't want to change that. You don't want to hide it. You want to make it look more natural. This is the bridge there at Magnolia. I tell everybody you need to look at things differently throughout the seasons, because everything changes. There's different looks, some better, some not so good. But as beautiful as this is, 2 months earlier, that's what you had. Totally different, same spot, different trees, changing color at different times. Now we all make mistakes, and this is the biggest one we make. Planting azaleas underneath an ancient oak like that. Look at the gnarly texture of that oak. Why would you want to plant something in front of it? I know they live good there, but you're blocking the most beautiful thing in the garden there. You want to open it up and draw people's eyes into that. Those trees add stature to your garden. Don't cover them up. Once again, at Magnolia, there were so many hurricanes, the trees are windswept. They lay that way. Why plant the azaleas there? They should have been planted out and let that corridor to lead you down through there. So those are the things you want to look at when you're designing something. Look past what's there, look to enhance and not replace. I love camellias. Our problem in this country, we prune camellias like tall bushes, and you actually lose the beauty of a mature camellia. They're just, you know, if you're planting camellias in your garden, just remember, a camellia can attain a size of 25 or 30 foot and live well over 1,000 years. So be careful where you place them. Can you imagine having a bench under something like that? Now, once again, we do it wrong. We saw them down because we like tall bushes, but look how beautiful that would be. I tell everybody, if you've got old camellias, let them grow like that. If you want a pretty little bush, plant you another one underneath it and think three-dimensionally, but never, because these majestic giants, they just can take over the garden. Another way to use camellias is plant them where they grow out over a path. something like that. If you don't have that much room, you can take a small, but once again, you're not pruning it like a ball. You're allowing it to grow natural. If you plant it in the edge of the woods, it's going to grow towards the light, and you get something like this. But always remember, and I can't beat this home enough, camellias are trees. You may not live long enough for them to be a problem, but somebody's going to have a problem with your camellias someday. Yeah.
Well, you're talking about pruning. Do you ever prune?
Well, yeah, yes, I love Dr. Dan Nathan in Fort Valley. You prune a camellia opened up like a Japanese magnolia or Japanese maple. That's what you want. Dr. Dan told me you prune it so if you throw your wife's cat through there, you don't hit his head. But you want to open them up. You'll have fewer insect and disease problems. And the character of most mature camellias are just beautiful. And this, you see them in Europe, it's just fascinating to see these old camellias there. Here in America, we turn the camellia into a show flower. If you go to most of these camellia grates yards, they'll have a camellia that high with 4 limbs on it with a bloom at each end because they're trying to grow a flower for the show. Or we keep them pruned back like tall bushes and we miss this effect, and it's really a shame. Now, we're going to show you my romantic garden to give you some ideas. When Mary Ann and I, we were managing magnolia, we were the first time, as a matter of fact, anybody outside the Drayton family had ever managed magnolia. So it was really interesting. When COVID hit, we caught the first wave of it being in a public garden, and it was bad. We survived it. It was like a bad flu, but you get to thinking we'd already bought us a house getting ready for our retirement, and you're thinking, gosh, you'd die and miss it all, not get to enjoy it. Well, we found this house online. We called our realtor over there, Hamilton and Bob, and he set everything up for us to look at it. Well, we went down there, and this is what we saw, and we hated it. But I told Mary Ann, we have told Bob to get everything ready so we can, sit down and look at this, and we got to kind of stay here to let him. We can't hurt his feelings, in other words. Even though we don't want it, we'll tell him, yes, this is nice, but we don't want it. But when we walked into the house, this is what we saw in the back, and we fell in love. Magnolia, Mary Ann tells everybody, we bought the lot, the house just came along with it. This is the backwater of Lake Harding, and it's just beautiful up there. We can walk out. When we were at Magnolia, the Drayton family gave us a cabin 10 foot from the Ashley River, and the back of the house was glass, and we were heartbroken because we knew we were going to lose that when we left. But the back of the cottage there is glass, and this is the view we've got. Of course, it wasn't good this week because we've had all of that rain. The water made it all the way back to the house. I could have sat at the breakfast table and fished. And I got a lot of mud to clean up. But you can see why we fell in love with the place. And then you get in the kayaks or the canoes, and you go up through there. And for miles upon miles on the backwater, these trees grow in and out. And for a romantic gardener, we're just in love with this. Native azaleas and mountain laurel on each sides of the creek. It's just beautiful like that. So that's why we fell in love with it. But we're still back to, oops, wrong way. We're still back to this. Now, we have been retired 3 years. So I want you to think as we go through this and remember that everything you see has been done in 3 years. First off, we started out, we knew we wanted a lot of flowers there. I'm on the board of the Rosalind Carter Butterfly Trail, so it's very important. That's what I got to brag on everybody that has been working to help the monarchs. This year, the Conservation Corps moved the monarch from being endangered on up to being threatened. And we're hoping in the next 3 years it'll be completely off the list to start with, just to show you the effort of people like the Rosalind Carter Butterfly Trail, what you can pull off if you really try to do it. I'm just really excited about that. But anyway, we love rocks. When I'm always trying to figure out what to give my wife for a present, I order a pallet of rocks. She loves that. About real easy with that. The big rocks, we couldn't lift them. So I tied a tarp on the back of the John Deere lawnmower, and me and her roll the rocks up on the tarp, and then I would drive up to the top of the hill and roll it off and hope it stopped where we wanted it to stop. But this was the first bed we put in, starting there, and this is what it looks like now. It's just beautiful, and we just go in there. Mary Ann, when we retired, she started a company called Growing Old because we're growing old. And I grow them and she sells them. We do a lot of heirloom plants, pollinators and stuff. And this is what didn't sell. I bring home what didn't sell. Once again, in a romantic garden, remember, you're doing things the way nature does it. So you don't want a block of white and a block of red. Nature jumbles things up. They do that. So if you're going to do a romantic garden, you want to follow through with that. This is what the front of our cottage looks like now. Now, this is the solution to a problem. Our driveway is right up there in that corner. Our driveway, our lot is the mountainside going down into the water. Our driveway drains the mountain. That's what it amounts to. So we were getting this volume of water. We get 3 inches of rain. We can get a 6-inch river flowing right down under the house, which is not good. You don't want that much water running under your house. So we built this walkway here to funnel the water down the right-hand side of the house. I don't like drains. Remember, I'm a natural person. Besides that, you put in drains and the first leaves that go in there clog them up and you're stuck with them. So we got the water going that way, and then we created a dry creek bed down the side there. Make it natural looking. Early in my career, I spent my entire life spraying moss with Roundup trying to kill it, and I'm on my hands and knees with water trying to keep it alive. But that's fun. I got to collecting moss and putting it in there, and this is what happens when it rains. And it perfectly takes the water around there. As a matter of fact, we went out there in this last flood and watched, and even the gravel in the driveway that we have that big, it picked it up and washed it down, but this still handled all the water going through there. That's the front of the cottage now. 3 years. That's what it looked like. And it's been fun because my wife and our gardening ideas are totally different. We prove opposites attract. That's no about. As a matter of fact, early on in our career working together, we actually did a local access television show because the director figured out that we were so different. He would have me do something, and when I walked off, Mary Ann would walk on and say, "Ladies, now I'm going to show you how to do it right," and change it all over. So this is actually a culmination of that. Every once in a while, she'll take my shovel away from me because she says I plant too thick. So I have to get permission sometimes to plant. This is the back of the house now. Once again, that's the boathouse. And I have found, if you do not know, if you live on a lake, it doesn't matter whether you have a boat or not, your boathouse is very important. So this is what we did with the back of the house. And of course, the water's right up here. That light's on the dock there. This is interesting. This is the right-of-way for the power lines. It runs right through the middle of our property. Well, you can see what we did was we have to allow access when the power goes out for the big trucks to drive through there. But that doesn't mean it has to be straight. You see how it meanders around? We planted both sides. You can see the pole straight ahead there. And the lines have broke 3 or 4 times since we've been there. The trucks go through right there. It doesn't do any problem. They don't get upset about it. But it doesn't have to be an ugly area.
How many acres do you have?
We have a little over, probably 1.25 acres. In my younger days, I wanted 30 acres. I can't keep the limbs picked up on 1.25 acres now. So. And if you're not familiar with how things work on the backwater, the houses in that area were fish camps. I remember being a kid when those fish camps were there. They never had indoor plumbing. They never had power. If your roof leaked, you nailed a board on it where it's leaking at, so it leaked somewhere it didn't bother you as much. When they built the lake, they had to grandfather all of these cabins in. A lot of them are shacks. But to build there now, if you can own a shack, you can build a $1 million mansion attached to it. No shack you can't build. So they just actually, our neighbor down there just built, he had a square box, it was like 10 by 10. He just built a beautiful house, and then he tore the box down after that was done and the inspection was done. So it's just really fascinating, the lore, which again is romantic. I'm living in a fish camp. There again, the front of the house. And you can see the power lines run right down through that way. And now we're working on this garden to the right-hand side back there, the woodland garden. Mary Ann, when we were at Magnolia, we had this huge fairy garden for kids and stuff. Why should kids have all the fun? So we've actually started building us a fairy garden down there. And of course, she was in there last night. She bought a bunch of frogs for the fairy garden. And she's got this, anyway, she's gluing her frogs in, getting ready to go down there. So that's the next thing we're going to be doing, is developing a fairy garden for 60-year-old people.
Are they real frogs?
Huh?
Are real frogs?
No.
Okay.
No. But it's funny, if we ever agree on something, like I said, we're totally different. And I come in one day and I said, Mary Ann, sit down. I think I want to put in a fairy garden. And she bought off on it. So we jumped right on that. Nighttime is important in your garden. And you don't have to have a lot of expensive light. You have to look at what you enjoy and what you want out of it. And all this is just floodlight. That's down there. I fish at night. I love the catfish. But it doesn't have to be ugly. It can be beautiful. And I'll end with, this is the front of our house. So you can see everything that you can do there. The biggest thing to think about is what you want to do is what you like. I'm going to end with this story. When we lived in Atlanta, there was a man across the street. His name was Tubby, an elderly man, and he had the most god-awful yard I have ever seen. Junk just popped here, pop here, pop here, pop here. And of course, you know, I had to go over there and offer my services to straighten it out to him. He invited me in, because there was a bank that went down like this, and he just put stuff ran crazy. He invited me in. When we walked in, he set me down on the couch, and he opened up the curtains of his front window, and that was the most tremendous view that I have ever seen in my life. In other words, everything he had done to landscape that bank in front of him was so he could see it from sitting in his den. And that's what's important. Who cares what the rest of the people think? This is what I want here. So what you're going to do is, I love doing crazy stuff. Plant you a row of pink crepe myrtles and put a white one right in the middle of it. Or down towards the end, to make people think, well, they must not have known that was white when they planted it or something like that. I love misdirection and things like that. So we're going to talk now. Are there any questions you can have? I mean, there's no right or wrong way to do a romantic garden. What you want to do is do what you like. Any questions?
Where is your house? You talk about a fishing camp or whatever?
Yeah, we're on the backwater of Lake Harding on the Chattahoochee River.
Is that in Georgia?
Well, it depends on which way the wind's blowing. The Chattahoochee River is the dividing line between Georgia and Alabama, and our phones most of the time say we're in Alabama, but yes, we're on the Georgia side of it. My kinfolks are on the Alabama side. I haven't coaxed them into swimming across yet and come to visit us, but there's always a chance. We were getting ready to retire. We were looking all over the country, and the only place that Mary Ann and I could agree on was here. And that's because many of you know Ernest Coon. Ernest Coon was a personal friend of mine, and Ernest, we would go over there to visit him, and we just fell in love with the area.
What do you do about bugs?
Oh, you'd live with them. No, actually, what you have to do is be very careful. I don't plant a lot of dinner plate hibiscus in the garden because you have to spray them a lot. Most things you don't have to spray as much, and if I do, I'll use something as simple as Malathion and Target.
I'm talking about the ones that bite you.
Oh. They don't like mine. I taste bad. They eat Mary Ann up. They never bother me so much. So now we do have a deer problem. And there's no solution to that. Develop a taste of deer and gravy. That's all I can say. Our neighbors feed the deer in their front yard. And so what they do is they eat there, and if they decide they want a salad, they come through our garden. I spray Deer Guard every 2 to 3 weeks. I have found I can buy it at Lowe's, and I can cut the strength in half, and it works just as good. And it also goes through your sprayer easy. Deer Guard's thick, it'll clog your sprayer up. So I get 2 sprayings out of every bottle, and I usually get 4 sprayings, 2 tanks out of every bottle and 4 sprayings out of that.
Does it work?
Yeah. It works better. Mill Organite works great too till it rains. And the moment it rains, it's gone and they'll come back. I spray everything in there, and Mary Ann had bought a flat of flowers, and we unloaded the van and we set them right down there, and I forgot to spray them that night. The next morning the deer had mowed it right back, just that one flat. I guess they go through smelling something that they like to eat there. And the flower beds on the back, I turned them into kitchen gardens. So I plant onions, potatoes, tomatoes, and stuff like that because I don't care what y'all think, this is my garden. Any other questions?
I've got a camellia bush.
Mm-hmm.
Is it too late to turn it into
No,
a tree?
no.
How do you even go?
You're going to go inside there and you're going to cut out every limb that's growing towards the inside and open it up. Like think like a Japanese maple, and then allow the limbs to grow out like that. And actually your camellia show people do that because they want big blooms too. You'll have fewer blooms, but they will be bigger, and you'll have less insect and disease problems because when you have no airflow in there, that's where you get those. The one thing you always want to do on your camellias, and I'll throw this out, limb them up 18 inches off the ground. If the limbs touch the ground, but insects can just walk up and infect the tree. But number two, camellias don't get a lot of diseases, but the worst one is dieback. And dieback, for it to happen, you have to have two things. You have to have, when the dieback disease is prevalent in the spring, you have to have water splashing it up into an open wound on the camellia. What people don't realize is for about 4 hours when the leaf drop starts in the spring, you got an open wound there. And if it rains and splashes up, if you limb them up at least 18 inches, you're taking them out of that splash barrier. Dieback is so bad because it's one of the diseases that can cross through the cambium from the live wood into the dead wood and hibernate. And we don't have a way to get a chemical into the dead wood to do anything to it.
When should you fertilize it?
Fertilize camellias right after they finish blooming. And don't put out slow release. Go with something like 1359 or a blueberry fertilizer. If you don't have irrigation and you're putting out slow release fertilizer and it doesn't rain, then you're not getting any fertilizer to your plants, and then at the wrong time of the year when the rain comes, you're fertilizing them too much. And really, if your camellia is healthy and it's a big established camellia, don't fertilize it. Because if you fertilize it thin, all you're doing is upping the sugar production in the plant, which is going to increase your insect problem because that's what they live off of.
That was the question. Okay, we bought a house that has these big, beautiful camellias and a lot of
Yeah.
big plants. And I haven't done anything and I've been worried. So
Okay.
what you're saying is
Don't.
just let them continue to keep
Right.
growing.
If you start getting a lot of lichen on the trunks, if you the lichen and moss, if a camellia is healthy, it's growing new skin, it's exfoliating a lot, so the lichen can't attach. When the lichen starts attaching, that's when you know that your camellia is starting to get a little hungry, and you may want to put out something there.
The new ones, though, that I bought, all little plants.
Yes.
Okay, the leaves turn yellow, and I've lost a whole lot of them, and now I have a lot of little ones that are yellow leaves.
Wait till spring and see what could be happening. Did you plant them in a bed with a lot of pine bark?
It's a whole different area where there had been pine trees that, have
Yeah.
now been cut back.
A lot of times a camellia, if the leaves are damaged, will drop their leaves, the old leaves, and start out with the new. But you got to remember, in a nursery in full sun, those camellias are pumped full of nitrogen. And so what happens is you plant them in there and all of a sudden you don't have as much, and that can be causing some of the problems.
Would that be true of azaleas with the lichen too?
Yes,
Okay.
anything like
So
that.
you
Anything that's growing is shedding new bark every year. And when you stop getting that new shedding of new bark, it just means they're hungry. It's slowing down. Doesn't mean it's going to die, but it does mean it's slowing down in its lifespan.
So which,
I have a bunch of seedlings. I want to know when the best time is to transplant them.
Right now, before it gets, usually fall is best.
Is it?
Yes. And you know that a camellia from seed takes 8 to 20 years to bloom. And looking around the room, a lot of people better start real quick. I'm the National Vice President of the Azalea Society of America. I hybridize azaleas now because they'll bloom in 3 years. But one interesting note you may not know about camellias, Camellias are unlike any other plant on the face of the earth because they were grown by collectors and aristocrats, and their lineage was preserved. There's a set of books, it's like the old World Book Encyclopedia called the International Camellia Register. It's online right now. You go in, you can type in a camellia's name. It will tell you the date she was named and her mother's name. And you type in her mother's name, then it will tell you the date she was named and her mother's name. And you can take a camellia all the way back to where it was discovered in the Orient. It's fascinating. You can't do that with any other plant. And that's important because, jump up on my soapbox here, there is a myth that Andre Michaud planted the first camellia outside at Middleton in 1785. Might have been true, but they made a terrible mistake of putting a name on it. They carry Reine de Fleurs, they take you and show you, they tell you it's Reine de Fleurs. If you go to the International Register and type in Reine de Fleurs, it tells you Reine de Fleurs was named in 1844. Its mother was Masoshi. You look up Masoshi, it tells you that Masoshi was discovered in Japan in 1828. It was put on a ship with the Dutch East India Company. They even used the captain's name. Captain Sabol took it to Belgium, where it was named after the head horticulturalist at Louvain. Mr. Donkerai took the camellia name for him and produced a seed that he named Reine de Fleurs in 1844. Michaud died in 1802. So for that myth to be true, Andre Michaud would have had to plant that camellia 40 years before its mother was discovered in China or Japan. Yes?
I'm new to camellias, but I love them and I want to grow them. So I'd like to know what kind of soil do I need besides Georgia clay and what sun requirements.
In the old days, we would dig a hole, work a lot of organic matter in, plant it in the middle of that, and then we got smart. The problem is, it doesn't matter if you got clay or not. If you can't amend the whole bed, you've got to get that camellia into clay soil. And they grow all over Georgia. They will do that really well. What you have to do is you have to remember when you dig a hole and you plant that camellia, it's in that rotted pine bark. All you've got there is a bathtub. The ground around it will dry out quicker, and you have to water right on top of the plant for the first couple of years till it gets out into the soil. If you can't, what we did was younger, and I remember this in my career, we used to plant these big trees, dig a big hole, work all this organic matter in, put the tree in it. 10 years later, the wind come and blew it over because it was still in the pot we planted it in. And when you fertilize away from that to try to pull the plant roots out into the native soil.
So can you mix the clay with
In an entire bed, not a hole. Make an entire raised bed. But remember, when you're working all this organic matter in, like rotted pine bark, soil-borne bacteria love a ratio of 1 part nitrogen to 30 parts carbon. That just makes them all happy because they break the carbon down. In about 3 years, then it becomes organic nitrogen and it's fine. The problem is, you work all this organic matter in, you've changed that ratio now of 1 part nitrogen to 400 parts carbon. And that's why your camellias a lot of times will turn yellow, is because all the nitrogen in there is going to break the carbon down. We put in a rose garden at Massey Lane, and I remember I sat down and actually figured it out, and I was fertilizing with 30-0-0 to get 12% nitrogen on the plants because we had a lot of organic matter there. But I will tell you this, camellias are idiot-proof. They're a man's plant. 90% of the American Camellia Society is male because we really don't want to be challenged. That's the truth.
What about rhododendrons?
They're like azaleas. They'll do fine. Rhododendrons will take more shade than evergreen azaleas, which take more shade than native azaleas. Plenty of native azaleas in full sun. But you want to get them established with a lot of organic matter, and you fertilize them just like camellias right after they bloom.
Do camellias like full sun or do they like shade?
Shade is relevant, and you have to think about that. Camellias will take 4 hours of full midday sun if the hot afternoon sun sets behind a house or trees over here. The more light you give camellias, the faster they will grow and the better they will be. There are camellias at Massey Lane that have never seen the light of day, and they were planted 30 years ago this high, and they're still there. They're doing fine, they just don't grow. And you don't get as many blooms.
I don't know if you answered the question. Going it back to old times, you used to have a big hole and amend it. What do you do now?
You may amend the entire bed.
So you don't have a choice to do the entire bed?
Well, yeah. Or plant directly in native soil.
All right.
I mean, it's amazing. If you go to Louisiana and you dig a hole, it fills up with water. You know what they do? They rake the soil into a big giant donut and plant the camellia in the middle of it. But you have to get the roots. For a plant to live, it's going to have to get its roots out into the native soil. There's just no way around that. If it doesn't do that, sooner or later, all you're doing is planting in a bigger pot and a bigger pot, and it's going to stay. If you're a camellia and you got all this organic matter and people are fertilizing right here in this big giant pot, what are you going to do? You're going to keep the roots going right around there.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
You mentioned the fertilizer, 13-5-5.
Yeah, or something like that. On camellias, I usually use a blueberry fertilizer. If your camellia ever sets buds and drops them before they open, you're missing one of the trace elements. Now, there are lots of trace elements, manganese, copper. What you can do is most blueberry fertilizer has trace elements in it, and I don't care if I'm missing something, I'm just going to hit them with everything. And if you'll do that, then your camellias will get healthier, and that. I got one over here.
Yeah, I planted a bunch of camellias this fall, and the deer mowed them to
Yes. Deer and gravy, deer and gravy, deer and gravy.
Should I break off all the flower buds so it doesn't put that strength into it?
You can, but I mean, there's not a lot of energy moving back and forth in the camellia this time of the year. So if you could get the bloom fine, the biggest thing is going to be if the light comes back on that. But yes, you would say you would do some saving if you did that. I don't know. Normally I wouldn't. I just leave them on there and enjoy what I could of them and let them back out. You usually, when that happens, you'll get one good shot. Most plants, if they defoliate or they lose their leaves, you get one more good shot of them coming back, but you only get one more good shot of that, you know. So.
Do you like hollytone as a fertilizer?
Hollytone's a good fertilizer. If the fertilizer does not say minor or trace elements, it doesn't have it in it. And these people that say, oh, these camellia grapes that tell you, all I use is cottonseed meal, that's bunk. It really is. That's not even enough nitrogen to be fooling with it.
The frequency of bloom, like these older ones appear to bloom, different times, but once a year. Now, newer ones, haven't I heard that they're blooming?
Yes. But then again, remember what happened to the Rose Society. The more you hybridize for the bloom, the weaker the plant gets. And the roses got these big, beautiful roses that wouldn't even grow on their own rootstock. So you have to balance the two. I have found the older varieties that have not been hybridized as much do much, much better in the color.
Can you recommend a kind of blueberry fertilizer for camellia?
No, it doesn't. I just go look. Actually, I say blueberry fertilizers because they have trace elements in it. I'm looking for a fertilizer that just has trace or minor elements in it. It'll say that on the bag. It just so happens that most blueberries need that type of fertilizer, need the trace elements, so most blueberry fertilizer has it in it.
Do you feel that same way on azaleas with those new reblooming azaleas that?
Oh, Buddy Lee's a personal friend of mine. He's a hybridizer, if you didn't know that, of Encores. Yes, I love Encores. The problem is with your Encores is you don't ever get that wham, bam, here I am that we get in the spring. You get a sprinkling throughout. And they do really well. Now, they say put them in full sun. I've noticed the Encores, if you put them in shade, they grow like a dogwood, and you get all that, contorted growth. I'll tell you a joke on Buddy. This is funny. Buddy and I went down to the Mobile Botanical Gardens, and Dr. Bill Barrett, the director of Bellingraph Gardens back then, and Buddy was standing there talking to each other, and I told Mary Ann, get a picture of me in between Buddy and Bill, and they'll think I'm a somebody too. So I get in the middle of them, and Mary Ann's getting ready to take the picture, and Buddy says, be sure to get my shoes in it. And I looked down, and I thought, well, they were a nice pair of shoes, but he sure is proud of them. So Mary Ann took 4 or 5 pictures. He goes over there, he rolls through them. He says, you can use that one, you got my shoes in it. And he looks at me and winks and says, if you get your shoes in your picture, your belly don't look so big. And I went back and looked at all my pictures. He was absolutely right. So if you ever hear one of my friends say, "Did you get Tom's shoes in it?" That's because of the story there. I'll end with one more story, and I'll hang around a little bit if you have any questions. I'll end with one more story on Buddy, because like I said, we're friends. When I went to Magnolia, I called Buddy up, the hybridized Encore SS, and I said, "Buddy, I want to put in some Encores, and I want you to give them to me." And he said, "Well, Tom, how many do you want?" And I fired back, "Well, I want the biggest collection in America." And I laughed. He said, "Well, I'll see what I can do." And he laughed, and we hung up, didn't think any more about it. 2 weeks later, 2 18-wheelers full of Encores showed up. I had nowhere to put them. 8,000 azaleas, one sweep. We put in the largest collection of Encores in the nation. 2 weeks after that, Buddy called me up and said, "Would you like another load?" And I'm like, "No, thank you. I think we got to go." But anyway, thank you for having me. I'll be around if you have, because a lot of people have questions they don't want to ask in public. Create a romantic garden. Thank you.
Nice.